Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider presented by FanDuel. Matthew Collar here and Chris Trapasso, the official draft analyst of Purple Insider, back from the NFL Combine. We've got all the workouts taken care of now in the books. We've got actual numbers. We've got still issues with how long people's arms are, Chris. And also a new trend has emerged at the NFL Combine where if I'm not good at the 3-cone, I just don't do the 3-cone. And then no one can say that I can't do a 3-cone. It's a little bit funky now. I saw some people coming out with, oh, this is the fastest group that's ever existed. No, it's not. This is the group that has decided if I'm slow, I'm not running. So only the fast people decided to run. How much do you think this messes with the numbers and the results, that there is this trend of basically nobody's messing with the 3-cone and they're only doing the events at the combine that kind of work for them?
Yeah, that is a very astute point, and it's important to bring up because teams can fall back on, oh, well, we have the tracking data, so we really know how fast he is on the field. And I don't know. I'm assuming they might have some change of direction data from the tracking, but it's not anything that's on next gen, even in the NFL. And I feel like I'm going to say back in the day on this show, but it's been like 4 or 5 years now, that I would always and we would always discuss 3-cone, and that is not like the ultimate indicator of athleticism, but being a linear athlete and being explosive, that's one thing. But the ability to change directions in a hurry, that drill is highlighted and was created. Like that's why the 3-cone and the short shuttle were created. And 5 to 10 to 15 years ago, you would get, I don't want to say 95%, but almost anyone that worked out would go through everything. And then it's gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. There was like a couple of groups that had like two guys do the 3-cone. I don't know if it was linebackers or something like that. So it certainly is something to keep in mind. And then to your point about the 40-yard dash, I think that's absolutely true, that just the guys that lose a little bit of weight for the combine to and train for that drill, that's just running as fast as you can and exploding, is why we are seeing all these corners in the 4.3s, linebackers in the 4.4s, things like that, because they are prepared to just run in a straight line. I'm not going to say it. I mean, maybe I'm biased because I love the combine. I'm not going to say it doesn't matter anymore, but I absolutely wish that we could get a better overall picture of a prospect's athleticism to see more of these guys do something where they literally have to change directions. Broad jump, vertical, 40. None of those drills ask them to change directions, which we know is an absolute vital part of playing football.
Well, and this is where I feel like the NFL, they still are getting their answers by now being able to track the velocities on the drills. And the broadcast did a good job of showing us at times, oh, here's a guy and look at the peak speed that he hit when he was flipping the hips, or when the guy was, reaching down to grab whatever it is, the towel or a shirt or something that they pick up off the ground, and they're getting the velocity numbers on those. So behind the scenes in those buildings, they're able to look at those things. But the reality of the 3-cone is that you had many years of data to compare and to be able
Yes.
to say, like, all right, this is what the 3-cone actually means. And it was a pretty predictive stat on some stuff. Like, there's never one number that's going to tell you something, but it tended to actually do better in predicting success than the 40-yard dash did. So it's really exciting to see fast guys run fast. But at the end of the day, I mean, even someone like Carnell Tate, where he runs a slow 40, and no matter what his agent got out there about, his run or whatever, it's not a fast 40. But then when you look at wide receivers and the correlation of 40 to success, there is none. There really is none. If you're in a certain area, then you're fine. Even in fact, most of the fastest guys get overdrafted anyway. So we saw that certainly from John Ross is probably the most memorable example, but that's something that goes across the history. Now, when you're looking at these velocities and going, well, he got up to 16 and a half miles an hour. What does that mean? You don't even have like historical data to really be able to tell you. So there is a challenge there of figuring out what this stuff means. Although I will say there's a lot of guys that left nothing to the imagination with how freakish they are. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go through, I made a list of 3 players at each position of need for the Vikings. We're going to go through them. You're going to pick out the guys from my lists that stood out. And then we will close the show with a draft simulation. It's time for our first post-combine draft sim. So let's begin with the safety position. I think stood out the most to me with one guy in particular, and that would be Dylan Thieneman, who jumped way off of just jumped off of the screen when he was doing his workouts. I saw Mike Renner tweet, "Is this the most athletic white guy ever?" And, I think at his size, that might actually be true. Not at any size, though. I think Aiden Hutchinson might have a good case for that. So Thieneman, Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, and AJ Halsey were the guys that stuck out to me. Halsey is from LSU. We haven't talked a ton about him. McNeil-Warren stood out for a little bit of a different reason. It was because he did not blow away the NFL Combine, which I thought in order for him to make a case that he was going to be like the next Imanware, he would have really had to have done that. And I don't think that he did. So what was your take on how the safeties performed?
So we talked about them, I think, a little bit in Indianapolis, or maybe even the week before. You're right about Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. He needed to have the combine that Dylan Thieneman had to be probably a first-round pick or solidify himself. He could sneak into one of those last couple selections. And like we were mentioning off air, McNeil-Warren still had a 35.5-inch vertical and overall like tested reasonably well. It's just he had a 10.2 broad jump. Thieneman's was 10.5. Thieneman ran 4.35 and McNeil-Warren ran, I believe, in the 4.5s. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like a bad workout at like 6'3" and over 200 and something pounds. But I think, I don't want to say it cemented him in round 2, but it kind of dampened some of the buzz. But it wasn't a bad workout. He's very explosive at that size. Thieneman came into this combine as my number one safety. I thought he was more explosive than Caleb Downs, and Caleb Downs decided not to work out. I think Downs is more instinctive, and he almost plays just as fast as Thieneman because he recognizes what's happening. Like he's like the first player to move after the snap very frequently and gets to the football. But Thieneman, to me, I think is range galore, deep middle, can cover your tight ends with that explosiveness and speed, just has a great feel for the game. And something that I'm sure they mentioned a lot during the broadcast, when you said about like the hip flip and the swivel, when you watch Dylan Thieneman from Oregon backpedal, he looks like a corner. Like his backpedal is crouched, and you can see, and you probably wouldn't be surprised at his type of combine workout that he has. He's a very explosive player. So whether you want to single out those two, Halsey didn't test quite as well. He's more of that slot defender that I think some teams will say, yes, this is a starting role. And I think he could bulk up a little and be a kind of a quasi linebacker, like a dime linebacker. But Thieneman, Genesis Smith from Arizona, McNeil-Warren, this safety class that I kind of talked up a lot, that it's the best safety class that I've watched, even though we didn't get all of those top tier guys working out, the ones who did absolutely proved that, yeah, this is a super deep safety class. And maybe you truly can, I know it's cliche for other positions, get a starter level player on the second or early third day at that position in this super deep class.
So, well, I think that that's true. There's a lot of connection from Thieneman to the Minnesota Vikings because if Harrison Smith is going to retire, then this is a guy who has held down a versatile role with Oregon. And I think what we know is Brian Flores wants that kind of player. He doesn't want somebody who just plays one position and that's all they can do. And then even on the broadcast, Daniel Jeremiah was like, I definitely could see him going at, somewhere around number 18 or so, and I think Jeremiah is as plugged in as anybody. Not all of his mocks don't hit 100 for 100, but he is a very dialed in draft analyst, and we're always paying attention. And he had the Vikings taking Dylan Thieneman. The safety position is different in terms of its value for the Vikings than I think it is other teams because of Brian Flores, him coming back. That clicks a lot to me. But if you're not doing it for him, then don't do it for anybody at number 18. So if he's gone off the board, and that's my other question is he going to be there now after putting up the types of numbers? Or do you think the league is still going to say, hey, it's wonderful that you did that. Safety is safety. We're not drafting you at before number 18.
That is a very important question for the Vikings, obviously, because everything you laid out makes perfect sense for them to just go from Harrison Smith to Dylan Thieneman. It's the exact same type of player. I think he tested himself inside the top 20. I don't think we're talking about Eric Berry or Jamal Adams that went like inside the top 5 or 7. And yes, I from talking to a lot of people in Indianapolis last week, and I kind of feel like we maybe touched on this in our last episode there. It's not even that this class lacks quarterback. It's that like the top of the class would be like in the middle of the first round in most classes. Like normally we say, oh, the top 7 to 8 to 10 guys, they're really, really awesome. Then there's a cliff. In this class, it's like, oh, these guys would be like picking 8, 9, or 10 in most classes. So I think Thieneman could go reasonably high, but I don't see him as a top 10 pick. I think he would at least get within striking distance. And it wouldn't surprise me if he's there at 18. But I do think for other teams, if the Vikings don't have Harrison Smith and they pass on Dylan Thieneman, that would be a kind of a red flag or raise a lot of eyebrows. And it wouldn't be much longer that he would be on the board. He was like fringe first rounder, back third of the first, and the 41-inch vertical and running 4.53 or 4.35, excuse me. That's a top 20 pick all day because his film is really good too.
Yeah. And the reason, I mean, most of these guys that I included on this list are guys who did really well in Indianapolis, but I felt like McNeil, Warren, and Halsey both solidified themselves as if you want a safety and you don't take it in the first round, you could
That's your
probably
guy.
get it in the second round. Like there
Yes.
wasn't any evidence from either one of those guys of, oh, wait, you got to get this guy at the very top. Let's move to cornerback, where my
Okay.
three were Colton Hood, Chris Johnson, and Malik Muhammad. Colton Hood, I thought, really stood out to me. Chris Johnson from San Diego State needed to have a really good combine to put himself on the map. And then Malik Muhammad has very solid numbers. And I know like jersey scouting is not a good idea, but Texas tends to have good corners. I feel like they do a good job of producing those guys. And Muhammad is someone that might not be a first round draft pick, but might instead be someone that you take in the third and could potentially feel really good about. So these are my three. And also, Chris, you know, with the rest of my list, throw in anybody else that you
Oh,
feel
sure.
like should be in your, hey, must watch for the Vikings. These are just the guys. Hood is a potential, I don't know if he's a first rounder, but could be
Mm-mm.
someone you trade back and take. I think that, you know, Rob Brzezinski, acting GM, is on record saying, I think you have to build a team through the draft, which is
Okay.
ironic because that's not what they've done at all in recent years. But they could be trying to stack some draft capital by moving back in the draft. That's where Colton Hood becomes interesting. Second round, I think Chris Johnson, Malik Muhammad, maybe a little bit later on that list. Because I thought that Avion Terrell, I don't even know if he did what he did
I
for
don't
actual
think
stuff. I
he
think it
did
was just on
anything.
field.
Yeah.
His on field was so terrific. I was like, well, that's a first round pick. So if you want to do that, I think he was just obviously one of the best moving corners out there and is pretty locked in as somewhere in the first. These three guys intrigued me as a maybe a second round corner.
Yeah, I mean, to me, and I'm not, I mean, no one knows what's going to happen. I thought from talking to a few people in the scouting world afterward that of the three that you originally outlined, Chris Johnson could be the one that is that late riser in the media world in like the week before or 2 nights before the draft. Like he's getting late first round buzz because his film at San Diego State, he is that supercharged high energy player. Had 4 interceptions last season, 2 took back for touchdowns, 9 pass breakups, and then he ran 4.4 flat and had a big time vertical. So the explosiveness that I think some people were questioning, he showed like, no, I'm actually first round caliber explosive. Colton Hood to me is probably, like you said, a second or a third rounder. I don't know if the hip fluidity and the agility that you need to deal with these separators today is up to par with being like a first round pick. I have not watched Malik Muhammad yet, but I do know, like you mentioned, his numbers were really good at Texas, and that is kind of becoming, I don't want to say like DBU, but it is certainly a program where I feel like a lot of defensive coordinators are like, yeah, we're getting a pretty well coached, fundamentally sound, refined corner at that position. We didn't really get a lot of workouts from like the top tier guys. So I think the three that you outlined were pretty interesting. The one that from a Vikings perspective that I think is interesting is Davison Igbinosun from Ohio State, who ran 4.45 and is your, I know we've talked about, you don't need to be huge at receiver. You don't need to be huge at corner on the perimeter, but he's like 6'2" with over 32-inch arms, wants to play physical, probably grabs too much and needs to kind of dial that back. But I think we've both agreed over the years, like I'd rather have your corner be too aggressive than like super duper timid, particularly in a Brian Flores defense. So Igbinosun, I was really interested to see after I saw that he was one of the biggest, longest throwback corners. Oh, is he going to run, in the mid 4.5s? To run 4.45 with the big time recruiting pedigree that he had and that how good he played in his final season at Ohio State. He's that, to me, I was thinking second or third round for the Vikings that could be plugged into a starting role right away.
That's a great point. And Brian Flores historically has aimed for some of those guys that
Long
are
arms.
on the bigger side. Yeah. And I was even watching Ephesians Prysock, which does sound like a fake name, but it is absolutely a guy who I thought had a good workout and was also one of those big dudes that, maybe the Vikings could take a look at. So let's go to, you're right about the top corners, though. There just wasn't much to work with there overall. It was not their, I didn't think it was really their combine. I think it was more belonged to like the wide receivers and maybe some linebackers too. So let's look at the running back position, which we've discussed a lot as being a pretty underwhelming class. And it may say something about the running back position that a team just traded for David Montgomery, who's a backup running back.
Who's about to be 29.
Right. And, is a guy, I mean, he's a tough runner and so forth, but certainly far from special. And if you're making that move, then you probably don't feel like, yeah, there's a guy that we can draft as a day one starter. So the three that stuck out to me were Jadarian Price of Notre Dame, who I thought had a phenomenal on-field workout. And Daniel Jeremiah at one point said, I think he's having the best workout of anybody out here other than Jeremiah Love, who I didn't put on the list because what he did on that football field was like, okay,
he moves differently than everyone else.
He's not getting to 18. He's just not. He's in that Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson, Ashton Genty. Like these guys are different. Jahmyr Gibbs. So he is probably going to be gone before the Vikings. Jadarian Price, however, I think could be available in the second round if they want him. Mike Washington Jr. lit the thing on fire at 220 pounds. He ran a 4.3, which was crazy. And he also averaged 6.5 yards a carry last year. And Emmett Johnson from Nebraska, it's slower, but beforehand I was throwing his name out and people were telling me now he's going to run like a 4.7. He's just dreadfully slow. And he was in the 4.5s, which is reasonable. I mean, you go back a few years, Delvin Cook ran a 4.49 and he was fine with his amount of speed. So I thought that Emmett Johnson came in just under the level where I would start to have concerns about your top speed. What did you think of those three running backs?
So it's really good about Emmett Johnson because I came into the combine and he was my running back too. I got to watch more of them and I've started to the last couple of days. I'm not surprised that Emmett Johnson did not test crazy well because what I mentioned to you, I don't know if it was in Indy or the week before, that he has the best, as of what I've watched so far, the best lateral jump cut of anyone in the class. And a lot of those players from Dalvin Cook, that was kind of sort of his game. LaShawn McCoy, I always go back to me, was like the best in the last 15 years at just hopping sideways and making someone miss. A lot of times they don't have these crazy explosive workouts, and the 3-cone and the short shuttle can help it like illustrate that athleticism for them. And they more just win on vision and that one little hop to the left or the right to make a linebacker miss. So yeah, you would have liked to see Johnson test better, but the fact that you also mentioned to me that you think the Vikings need pure explosiveness and the home run hitting ability that's been missing in the run game, that's not going to be Emmett Johnson. Mike Washington, to me, probably did as much for his stock as anyone at the combine, regardless of position. Not just because he ran 4.3 at like 230 and had like a 39-inch vertical, 1.51 10-yard split, which is like wide receiver fast, but it's because what we're outlining, that the running back class is just Jeremiah Love and like, all right, decide who's running back two. I think it'll be Jadarian Price as the second one off the board, which would be pretty interesting, back-to-back Notre Dame running backs. But now I think Mike Washington at that size, there's some like Latavius Murray to his game, who was kind of a, big, tall, upright back. And I think he landed throughout his career. He was that ultimate journeyman in some spots that gave him those big runways. If you give Mike Washington a runway, he will run over the safety and then accelerate and score a 60-yard touchdown. So to me, and I watched him recently this week, he kind of feels like the classic Shanahan KOC zone read. He has a little bit of wiggle to his game, or stretch run, like zone type blocking system that hit the front side or take one cut, put your foot in the ground, and hit that 4.3 speed in the 1.51 10-yard split and get upfield in a hurry. So he definitely has that breakaway skill, which is pretty rare for a running back that size.
Well, and we were talking about this just the other day. You and I were discussing how the Vikings hired Frank Smith from Miami, and what was the staple of Miami's backfield? It was having insanely fast Raheem Mostert, one of the fastest guys in the NFL, and then Devin Achane, clearly in that same ballpark. And they know how to get those guys moving in that system. And that's why Mike Washington, to me, stood out as who is the real burner? Who's the real guy that could run away from people? The question, I think, for all these is, do you want to spend a second round draft pick on that? It's the middle of the second round. It's not like it's pick number 33. I think at that point, it becomes very reasonable to do so. And we've seen a lot of running backs. The one that comes to mind, of course, first is Dalvin Cook, but also Jonathan Taylor. Like, there's a number of running backs, second rounders, Kenneth Walker, who have become really good players. And that's where it's worth it, because you might be drafting RB2, RB3, where other positions are edge rusher 14 by the time you get to, or wide receiver 9 by the time you get to the middle of the second round. And I think that somebody like Washington, if they like his fit, or even Jadarian Price, who might not have the best explosiveness of all time, but I thought he looks like a very natural athlete. Yeah, exactly.
He's very naturally athletic. That's a really good way to put it. And in writing the scouting report for Price, it was like, he can be a slasher. He can get low and give you that jump cut. He can run through guys, very flexible all throughout, from his ankles, knees, hips. So to me, he's Miles Sanders. I think he's very, very similar to that type of player. With Washington, I think that he did the most for his stock, but it wouldn't be surprising if he was there in the third round. Like, I wouldn't be stunned at that, because he didn't have, multiple years of high level, high volume production. He was at University of Buffalo, New Mexico State, and then Arkansas. 6.5 yards per carry in his final season in the SEC was really good. Obviously, the combine was elite, but even if some of your audience is like, second rounder on a running back that we're just kind of hanging our hat on the fact that he had a great combine, third round, I think, would be totally fine. And you and I both agree that, that is, I don't want to say that necessarily the sweet spot, but where we feel good about, all right, if you're going to be playing this guy and giving him touches on that rookie deal when he's cheap and doesn't have a lot of wear on his tires, it's completely fine picking him second or third round.
Okay, let's move to defensive tackle.
Yes.
And I will say that Caleb Banks.
Oh my God.
I know. Caleb Banks, the measurements
are silly.
Wow. Wow. I mean, this is a mountain. This is not a man. This is a mountain. This guy is 6'6", 327. And, a lot of people will say, he's like 6'6". And I was thinking about this with Fernando Mendoza. Oh, he's 6'5". Like, not exactly. He's close to 6'5". It's sort of the same thing. They'll be like, oh, this guy's 340, 6'6". And like, he's probably more like 6'4.5" and like 315 or something. No, this guy is every bit of 6'6", 327 pounds, and hands that are 11 inches, which I don't even know how to describe that to you. It's just like, that's freakish, right? The issue, and I thought that Banks, especially his 10-yard split, which is going to be more telling for a defensive tackle that size, unless he's got to run 40 yards for some reason to, Sam Adams run a touchdown back on an interception. Unlikely he's got to go 40 yards for anything. There were other people who came out wowed by him at the combine. I was like, okay, like good for a guy that big. The production issue, though, does make you go, okay, but why? Like, why would this gentleman at this size not be able to just toss other humans aside and throw the quarterback in the stands? Like, that would be my question.
It's a good question, and I want to frame this because you kind of started with just listing off his measurements. He is almost identically sized to Linval Joseph when he was coming out of UCF in 2010. Linval
Yeah.
Joseph was 6'5", 328. He had a 30-inch vertical, which is right around where Caleb Banks jumped. 34.5-inch arms, 10-inch hands, so literally an inch smaller hands than Caleb Banks. So that's just to be able to create that imagery of like how truly like gargantuan is Caleb Banks. Think Linval Joseph, who I'm sure for you seeing him in the
Oh yeah.
flesh is like scary, and certainly Vikings fans know how just physically intimidating he is on the interior in a league where everyone's big.
Yep.
The lack of production is certainly a thing, and it's almost like it's like backwards from what we normally talk about with defensive tackles. That Banks at that size, your initial thought would be, okay, he's probably just devours running backs against the run. He just kills people. No, he actually because he's so athletic, I think it's partially his own desires and part of what Florida let him do. He was like rushing up the field like Ed Oliver or Aaron Donald. And it was like, okay, like that's awesome. It was a spectacle to watch, but giving him some more time to read and react and toss aside those blockers as opposed to just getting upfield and then the running back runs past him. You're like, oh man. So I think that was part of it. Apparently there were some injuries last year. And I try to bring this back to the hometown team here for me in Buffalo. They drafted Deion Walker in the 4th round out of Kentucky last year. His second to last season in the SEC, everyone's like, oh my God, this is Dexter Lawrence 2.0. He was 6'7", 340, had insane pressure rate, all that stuff. Final season, got hurt, production dipped. Caleb Banks is a very similar story. That after 2024, everyone's like, oh, this is going to be a top 10 pick. Like he's just a freaky athlete. He's 6'6", long arms, and then got injured, and the production wasn't there in his final season. Deion Walker he was the best Bills rookie last year. He never hit the rookie wall. He did everything for them. He was great against the run, created a lot of pocket push. I think Caleb Banks is even more talented than that. And I think because of his pedigree at Florida, I think he was a little bit of a bigger recruit. I think he tested himself right in that range for where the Vikings are ultimately going to pick, between like as high as maybe pick 10 or 12 and no later than pick 20, because we always talk about it. The first round, yes, the best football players are there, but more so than anything else, the biggest freak athletes ultimately go there. And 11-inch hands and 35-inch arms and 6'6" Linval Joseph size, you just cannot produce that in a lab, or he's basically like he was built in the lab with Caleb Banks. So I really liked him on film and could see the upside. And then it all kind of came to form in Indianapolis at the combine.
And you can't exactly just sign a guy that's that size in free agency. They do not get there usually. So with Caleb Banks, I could be sold on. I am very big on production. You know why? Because it correlates better than anything else. You can talk about your 3 cones or your 40s or whatever else. Production's always number one. But from a freak perspective, could you put this guy in a certain situation, develop him into something? I also think that when you are that scary of an athlete, that it does often set a floor for you where even if he's just okay, he still is an impact player at that size. The other 2 guys I had were Lee Hunter and David, is it Gusta or Gusta? The only reason I included him is because he ranked number 1 in athleticism score by the NFL. So I'm curious, like, who is this guy? Is this like a late round project? I thought Lee Hunter's numbers were pretty poor, and to me said, all right, like it's great that everyone's high on this guy and is talking about, hey, maybe he's like DT2. I don't think that he is. I don't think the production says that. To me, though, what's interesting about Lee Hunter, an absolutely enormous human being also, is maybe that is your 3rd round run stuffing DT, because you and I have talked about this a lot, about how there's no guy that you're saying, yes, this is the Aaron Donald. Yes, this is the guy who's got great pass rush production. So if I'm going to get someone who's more along the lines of a run stuffer, I would prefer Lee Hunter a little bit later down the board, but I thought he needed to do better in order to make his case as somebody that could sneak into the 1st round.
Totally. And he's one that I agree with you that production does correlate more with NFL success than just a combine workout, but there are those thresholds that you want to see.
Yeah.
And especially compared to Caleb Banks and David Gusta, like Lee Hunter wasn't really in the same stratosphere. So now I do think that second, third, fourth round for him, someone that was a really productive player, did actually show some pass rush at this like kind of stocky nose tackle size, who's also tenacious against the run. That is like that would be a home run of a value selection. And you just say, hey, look, combine didn't work out. Sometimes these big squatty defensive tackles, or on the flip side, offensive linemen don't test particularly well, but are just good football players. We'll take them in the third round. And that, again, kind of like the sweet spot for running backs. That's truly the beginning of the sweet spot for those defensive tackles. I have not watched David Gusta yet. I know his pass rush productivity is actually pretty good, and he is a little bit of an older prospect, but he kind of feels in that same range. You could almost go the opposite where, okay, he didn't produce like Lee Hunter, and he's not a tremendous run defender, but he tested through the roof. And that sets almost a floor of, all right, well, this guy is a big body. We know he can move. So at the very least, he's going to threaten teams on pure athleticism alone. And we will see all those different types of defensive tackles go off the board, third, fourth, fifth round. Hopefully we can talk enough about them so the audience understands, all right, this is this type. Lee Hunter, high floor, maybe not a ton of ceiling. And then someone like David Gusta is kind of the opposite.
All right, let's go to centers. And I thought it was a very, very good day to be a center and talk about that second round. I mean, with Jake Slaughter, what everyone sees from Jake Slaughter is that he looks like he should be doing your taxes, right?
Yes.
But here's what I would say about that is
that's a good thing for a center.
Right. The center position is high IQ. Not that wearing glasses and having a goatee that looks like it's from 1998 has anything to do with your actual intelligence. But
that's a good call.
I do think that IQ is one of the most important things for the center position in the NFL. The question for me, though, watching a little bit of Jake Slaughter, wondering, okay, does he have the athleticism, though, to play in an outside zone? I know that it's out there that's kind of his maybe thing. I think that he showed at very least that there's a baseline there for him that he could be of that level. But I also don't think that he did so well at the combine where you'd be going, okay, well, now you're not going to be able to get a hold of him. And I feel like the theme of our list here is, hey, if that guy's there in the second, maybe that guy could be in the second. I don't think I would do it in the first. That's how I feel about this group, who all overall performed pretty well. Sam Hecht and Brian Parker from Duke, and Sam Hecht from Kansas State. All these guys, right? Kansas State.
Yes.
All these guys seem like solid second, third round, maybe third round type prospects, which does not preclude you from being a starting center in the first year, as we saw a couple years ago from Pat Elflein.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting with Jake Slaughter because he was the consensus top center going into the combine, and you nailed it that he didn't like test like Garrett Bradbury, but he didn't test so badly where you're like, oh, I don't know at this point. And ironically, I was just watching his film today, and in my write-up, you like mentioned that he looks like he can do your taxes, that he's so smart, that I wrote like he wins more with his mind than like pure short area quickness. There's times where defensive tackles kind of get to his outside shoulder and it's like, oh, he's just a half second late or a quarter second late, and the gate opens and it's a pressure. But more often than not, his head is on a swivel. He uses his length. He's taller and one of the longer centers in the class, uses those two areas of his game really well, or like from his attributes. But it does kind of make things a little bit more interesting at the center spot, that it wouldn't shock me if teams have a different center as their center one. And you're absolutely right. Like second, third, even early fourth round, I don't think that's crazy to then say, all right, step in. What also is interesting, and I believe we hinted at this maybe in the first episode of this draft season, I am all for the college offensive tackle, college guard, kicking down and playing center, because at guard and certainly at tackle, and there's certainly the helmet scouting here of Graham Barton, who was this decorated offensive tackle at Duke, kicks inside, is a first-round pick, and has become a pretty good player, one of the better young centers in the league for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers playing center. He's just not big enough, not long enough. And usually that's always so much negative connotation. Oh, he can't play tackle. Well, there's still 5 positions on the line. And sure, centers don't get paid as much as offensive tackles. Still vital. I think Brian Parker is that next either tackle the guard or guard to center convert who can certainly hit the ground running, and you wouldn't have to worry about a lack of lateral movement skills in that wide zone scheme because he has the tackle feet. And I thought he showed that at the combine in Indy.
Also worth mentioning that Connor Lew, who tore his ACL midway through this last season, he did the bench press and was extremely impressive. I saw that. I mean, that's, I don't know. It's a note.
I mean, it's cool. Yeah.
I don't know that he would be someone the Vikings would consider as having to need to recover from an ACL injury. I think that they'd be looking for someone a little more right away to be able to help them. But, I don't know. He's been listed as a top prospect at that position. It's just where is he at with the injury recovery? Linebacker, I want to have a short discussion about the linebacker position. The 3 names that I came up with there, Anthony Hill from Texas, Jacob Rodriguez, who I thought really showed out, and Kyle Lewis, an undersized linebacker from Pitt. That also flashed some excellent capabilities. And I saw Louis Riddick. No one gets higher on the draft than Louis Riddick. And I mean that as a compliment. And he was like, this is the next Derek Brooks. And I was like, okay.
About who?
Kyle Lewis. And I was like,
whoa.
Okay.
Is that first ballot Hall of Famer?
Okay. Yeah. That might be a little much, but I'm intrigued by his athleticism and toughness at that size. I think linebacker is on the list for the Vikings because when you look at where Blake Cashman is at, he's heading into the final year of his contract. I think they should extend him. I'm sure they want to extend him and make him a Viking for life, but you don't know that that's going to be the case. He's also had some injury issues. We don't know what's going to happen with Eric Wilson either. Eric Wilson is 31 years old, so they don't have any youth there at that position. Cashman is a phenomenal athlete, but they also don't have a lot of thump either in terms of like run stuffing and things like that. I don't know if this group is just that. Rodriguez probably is, but second round again, we're talking second, third round. I feel like this linebacker class has quite a bit of talent, Chris.
It certainly does. And I think with Kyle Lewis, you just have to answer me, like, would someone that size, I know they have Ivan Pace on the defense, but Kyle Lewis was like 6 foot 220, which I'm fine with. I do think you do need the right coordinator, which fortunately for the Vikings, I think they do, that will be okay and kind of scheme him away from some of the big bodies on the inside, because Lewis and Anthony Hill and even Jacob Rodriguez to a certain degree, who's relatively new to the position as a former quarterback, pretty interesting. They're all spectacular in space. You saw it in the on-field drills. They all had big-time verticals, 40-yard dashes right around 4.5, which is really what that high watermark that you want to see for that linebacker position. So it really will just come down to probably who's available. And we're saying all these positions are round 2, round 3 types. I'm a little lower on the linebacker group than I think most, because coverage, that none of those players were like, oh my God, spectacular in coverage. Look at all the pass breakups. Look at all the interceptions. Look at how they run down the seam. Range against the run, tackling reliability, which certainly matters, all there with Hill, with Rodriguez, with Kyle Lewis. But I think it always takes at least a year or so for those linebackers to be good in coverage. So if you're in Brian Flores' scheme and you're just more like, hey, just be a blitzer, don't miss a lot of tackles against the run, we'll be fine in the back 7, then I think those 3 players would make sense in the second round or third round. But in general, for me, in watching them, I thought that they are, like almost every linebacker prospect, works in progress when it comes to playing in space, understanding the route concepts behind them, and just making routine plays in coverage where they're not the one player that an offensive coordinator is like, we are going to exploit that rookie linebacker in space. Like we've seen a lot of early round, very athletic linebackers happen to them early in their careers.
Yeah, and I do go back a little bit to like a Brian Asamoah that we talked about. Well, it's a smaller league, right? It'll probably be fine that he's only 6 foot and 230 or something, and it wasn't fine. Just got washed out very quick by offensive linemen. And for Ivan Pace, once Harrison Phillips and Jonathan Bullard, the gap stuffers, were not there anymore, Pace just got destroyed by guards, and he ends up not even on the field. Now, not that Eric Wilson is huge, but Eric Wilson is 31, and he was somebody that was very experienced and I think understood how to deal with some of that stuff. Might be a little harder for young linebackers. And I think that's the linebacker position these days. It just feels like so many guys come into the league smaller that I think bigger linebackers might have an advantage these days with fullbacks and extra, tight ends coming on the field and so forth. One more position, that the wide receiver position will always be part of my discussion, but I didn't have guys that were at the very, very top because I would be surprised, not shocked, but a little surprised if the Vikings went first round wide receiver. But I have seen a lot of people talk about this being a deep wide receiver draft, and three guys that stood out to me: Bryce Lance, Trey Lance's brother. Holy cow, put on an absolute show at Indy. Omar Cooper Jr. and Chris Brazzell II. Omar Cooper Jr. from Indiana, right? And Chris Brazzell, deep ball expertise there at Tennessee. Size, crazy speed. Was very impressed by him. These are three targets to me that would be second or third round potential wide receivers. But I'm curious, before you dive into those three, like what you thought of the week for the guys at the top.
Well, I'll first start. Okay, yeah. So at the top, the fact that Carnell Tate ran 4.53, I sent out a tweet just like, wow, surprisingly slow, and didn't think that was controversial because he looks fast on film. He's coming from Ohio State. We've seen Curtis Samuel run in the low 4.3s. We've seen Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Terry McLaurin. It's like a factory of speedy, very refined wide receivers. I got just avalanched on Twitter like, oh, it doesn't matter. Speed doesn't matter. Devontae Adams ran. I was like, okay. Like, I'm not saying that Carnell Tate is going to suddenly be available in the second round or he's a terrible prospect. But if you are selling yourself as this deep ball vertical speed specialist and you run 4.53, I think his stock maybe sunk a little. Or some teams are quote unquote going back to the film to like make sure that he's fast. But Kai Lemon was apparently super weird during the press conference and with some interviews. I don't know if he did anything timed. Like, I don't think he ran the 40. Jordan Tyson, is still nursing a hamstring, but had like 26 reps on the bench. Like, he showed that he's really strong in the upper body. And Casey Concepcion, who I love, did not ultimately run either. So I think it was ripe for, like you're mentioning, that tier 2 at the wide receiver position to really show out. And Bryce Lance, Chris Brazzell, and even Omar Cooper Jr. that I didn't think was going to test that well, all tested very well. I'll start with Bryce Lance. I remember back when another NDSU wide receiver, Christian Watson, was getting a lot of buzz after a big combine. And I'm like, I don't really see it. I just see end arounds and go balls and posts, and he's not a great route runner. The second he gets in the NFC North, you're like, oh, he is big and fast, and maybe he's not going to uncover like a Devontae Adams, but just that size, that speed, that explosiveness makes him a weapon on the field. And Bryce Lance ran 4.34 with a 41-inch vertical from an offense that similarly, when I was watching him, I was like, they almost were like, this guy is an NFL top 50 to top 60 pick. We don't need him to run the entire route tree. Why are we doing anything besides throwing him screens and post and go routes? Very, very similar to Christian Watson. I don't know if he's quite as big and strong at the catch point, but a similar type athlete. I think Omar Cooper Jr. is DJ Moore 2.0. Very, very similar, rugged after the catch type wide receiver, pretty good hands. And Brazzell is fascinating because I know the last 3 or 4 years we talked about Cedric Tillman from Tennessee, and then we talked about Jalen Hyatt. And I don't think either of us were like, oh, we love these guys, because we're like, what a gimmicky scheme. Like, they have their outside receivers like standing on the sideline, and they just either stand there and don't do anything if the play's on the other side of the field, or they're running a post or a go route, or maybe getting a screen. I think Brazzell, he is kind of victim of some of that, and that's why we're not hearing about him as a top-tier prospect. But I will say he has a higher grade to me and most of the people that I talk to in Indy and after Indy than any of those other 2 Tennessee wide receivers. His route running is better, even though he's 6'5", he gets low, sinks his hips, and can explode pretty well, and certainly has that downfield speed. So maybe he's someone that will take time to learn the full route tree. Same with Bryce Lance, but the moldable ball of clay for both of those two in the second, third, fourth round has to be tantalizing for someone like Kevin O'Connell.
Well, and I really think the Vikings need to take a wide receiver somewhere because Ty Felton did not play much last year. Now, that doesn't mean he won't emerge, as we saw from Jalen Naylor and KJ Osborne before him. Keenan McCardle's great at developing these guys kind of over a number of years, but that doesn't lock him into, hey, he's wide receiver 3 right away. And we also just don't know what Jordan Addison's future is going to be. If they drafted a receiver in the first round, I'd be like, okay, I mean, that makes sense because Addison might not be here after this season. He might not be here 3 weeks from now if they got the right offer, depending on how they feel about the off-field stuff. But I was looking more at third, fourth round type of guys where you can get somebody with a little bit higher upside that you can pair with Justin Jefferson down the road or be your wide receiver 3. And I think these 3 stood out to me for the reasons that you're saying, but especially their development potential. And that's where, when you have what I think is one of the best wide receiver coaches in the NFL, I'm always looking at that. Like, who can they bring in those mid or later rounds? Because they've just had so much success with guys developing with Keenan McCardle, and those 3 stood out. But I also started to wonder, Chris, if the NFL is going to look at this wide receiver class and kind of be like, do we really want to take any of these guys in the top 15? Like, is there really a prospect of that caliber there? So this could be almost like that year with Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison and Quentin Johnston, where they're all
JSN.
flawed. Yeah. For different reasons. JSN, they may have missed on a little bit, but they all kind of came across as wide receiver 2s. That's how I feel like everybody at the top of this list is, which might push some guys down if they go, you know what I mean? Like, you're not having teams needing to reach in the back end of the first round to get this caliber of wide receiver that you and I are talking about.
So after I scout quarterbacks first, I've now gone to the second most important position in the NFL, wide receiver. I've watched like 25 receivers now. And when I watched, I was like, okay, the perceived top 4 are Lemon, Tate, Tyson, and Concepcion, I think. And I came away in kind of parallel to what I said about the whole class. I was like, oh, these guys are like good, but not Tet McMillan, not even Emeka Egbuka. They're kind of in that range. And he was in the 20s. They're not Jamar Chase. They're not Drake London. They're not Jalen Waddle. They're not any of those like, oh, usually the number 1 quarterback is going to be the first pick and the best receiver is a top 10 selection. So it was like, I think it's artificially, just because kind of like what we see at the quarterback spot, it's such a vital position. It's like, oh, well, yeah, the top 3 receivers need to be pick 8, 12, and 16. I don't really feel like that of any of these wide receivers. And now, even though I got like, I don't want to say roasted for it, but people really came at me about suggesting that 4.53 is not particularly fast in today's NFL, and it's not. Carnell Tate, I'm a little bit leery about his ability just to blow past people like he did in the Big Ten. Lemon is really good. I don't know about anything about the off field, but that could be a concern. Tyson has an injury and wasn't crazy after the catch. So yeah, I think this is much more likely to be that, 2023 draft class, as opposed to what we've normally seen over the last decade, where there's 2 or 3 guys off the board in the first half of the first round.
That's all I got. Oh, there's one more. There's one more guy.
One more. Okay.
Kenyon Sadiq, I think the biggest winner of the entire NFL combine, one of the biggest freaks of all time. And when I was looking, I think it was Aaron Schatz tweeted out a list of guys that were comparable to Kenyon Sadiq by some of his metrics. It's like the Vernon Davises, the Brock Bauer. It's like all the freaks. Is there any argument? Because I don't think that they're going to move on from TJ Hawkinson. I think that would be a mistake. But considering we are a 2 tight end world, but the thing is, you also have, Josh Oliver under contract, but you don't draft for right now.
Just for this year.
Right. And Sadiq he's a move tight end. He's not big enough to be a guy who's just going to move bodies all the time. So if you're thinking about down the road a little bit at all, I'm trying to squeeze it in and make it work as an argument, because you may land at number 18 and go, this is just the best prospect here. And tight ends usually do take a year or two of development.
Exactly, and I know it's a different GM, and we talked a lot about Dallas Turner, and Dallas Turner got better in his second season in the NFL. That it's taken time. Kenyon Sadiq's only 21 years old, so I think you could pick him and say, "All right, we do have T.J. Hawkinson, we have Josh Oliver, and we're not expecting you to come in and be Brock Bowers. We're not going to give you a Brock Bowers amount of targets, but maybe for 2027, then we're like not necessarily." Creating you as the offensive focal point with Justin Jefferson there, but suddenly to have two high caliber athletes that are young and explosive, I think that's something that maybe this new GM is like, hey, he's the best player on the board, and we don't and we like some of the round 2 and round 3 linebackers and receivers, and we feel like there will be at least 1 to 3 to 5 of those players at different positions that we like. Sadiq's film is good, his analytics are good, and now we know his combine was Vernon Davis level. To run sub 4.4, to have a 43.5-inch vertical, and there was weirdly a tight end that had a 45.5-inch vertical, Eli Stowers, and have a big time, like elite level, 90+ percentile broad jump. He is as explosive as it gets, and he has like the refinement in his game, catching the football and after the catch, that you normally don't see at 21 years old. So that's like the sneaky X factor dark horse that you can put in the back pocket, where it would not be, no, they didn't address the biggest need. But your point, you don't always just draft for what do we need in week 1, 2026. He would actually be a lot of fun to see him develop and actually see how KOC could continue to mold the offense. And I mean, his coaching buddy, Sean McVay, that he learned from, they ran more 13 personnel than like any team in the league, and no one saw that coming, and it got the Rams this close to the Super Bowl. So that would be really fascinating to see how KOC could evolve the offense if Sadiq is just there and they just pick him BPA.
And something else to consider is they're losing CJ Ham to retirement. And so they need the Josh Oliver position, maybe even to be in the backfield at times,
Okay.
or, just as a blocker out there that's even more valuable. But when I look at even back at once upon a time before a bunch of injuries kind of got to Irv Smith Jr., but in 2019, they drafted him as a 2nd-round draft pick behind Kyle Rudolph, and they played a bunch of 2 tight end sets. And it worked really well for that offense. They ran very efficiently. And then you had Irv Smith, who showed lots of flashes that year, and Kyle Rudolph was still Kyle Rudolph. So it's not a crazy thought. So we've thrown out all these names, Chris. What do we do when we've got all these names? We freaking draft sim. That's what we do. We draft sim. So I'm putting it up on the screen right now, and we're going to go through it, because now I made this joke the other day that, we go into the combine and every year, it's not that good of a draft and whatever. And then, of course, the combine happens. It's, I want all these players and I want them right now. So let's see what we would do. Let's just start off the draft here. Take a quick look at how the top of the draft played out. So in this version, it goes Mendoza, number 1, obviously, David Bailey, 2, Caleb Downs to Arizona. Not sure that's going to happen, but Jeremiah Love ends up with Tennessee, which I would be so sad for him. Then Sonny Styles, the biggest winner also of the combine, other than Kenyon Sadiq, ends up at number 5. And if we scroll down a bit, looking at positions, the Vikings might be into Mansour Delane and Jermod McCoy. Just feel like they're going to go high, at least in the projections. A couple of wide receivers. We've got Caleb Banks, Avion Terrell off the board here. Cassius Tiny Arms Howell goes
that's weird.
7th. That was weird. 17th to the Detroit Lions, putting us on the board here at number 18. So the top player by PFF, it looks like they have adapted now. Their post combine is Dylan Thieneman. Also, Keldrick Falk is kind of an interesting dynamic player there.
He's big, really thick, like 270, 280.
Yeah, could that be like a 5 tech? I feel like
which I would not. I would never like picking a 5 tech at 18
totally
overall.
100%.
So
Jordan Tyson is on the list. I'm just going to run through these real quick to kind of give an idea of like who's there. Jordan Tyson, the wide receiver from Arizona State. Denzel Boston, who hilariously couldn't catch the ball at the combine, but never dropped the ball in actual college football. Caden McDonald, who, if I'm not mistaken, didn't do anything at the combine. Is
He
that
did
right?
not. Yeah, he
Okay.
didn't do anything.
McNeil Warren, and then Kenyon Sadiq and Peter
Mm.
Woods are on the board here, along with Casey Concepcion, Caden Proctor. If I was another team, I'd be very excited about his combine as well. Colton Hood, I think we're getting away from first round draft picks. So my first instinct here is to either pick Dylan Thieneman or to trade down. What would you do?
That's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, I thought we always have to like circle back to wide receiver because I like to say on basically any show that I'm on, but certainly this one, when in doubt, go wide receiver. I remember you nailed the Jordan Addison pick that ultimately was a pretty good one. We're like, oh, we're not really sure what should they do. Just pick the wide receiver. Tyson, I'm a little bit lower on than most people than Tyson. So that's why that's not one that I'm super duper considering, although I think it consensus wise would be viewed as pretty decent or maybe correct value at 18. I would go Thieneman, trade down. I would think about Sadiq. But Thieneman, again, we talked about this, I think walking to one of the times that we recorded in Indy, the safety position as a whole and the advantage that you get to get a rookie contract first year safety is not that big up to the top of the position like it is for other spots. But in this Vikings defense with Brian Flores, I think the positional value is a lot higher than any other team. So I would just either pick Dylan Thieneman or move back and see if we can land somewhere in the 20s.
So the offer, and we're going to do 3 rounds here. The offer from the Chargers is 22 and 66 for 18. I feel like that's worth it.
I think that's worth it too because, and I think this is what teams have to do. They have to look at like who's picking in between them. I think you could still have a pretty similar-ish board in terms of Vikings need player or the players that are intriguing for the Vikings. So I think only moving back 4 spots to get that third rounder would be a home run.
All right, why don't we do that? They've
Okay.
accepted the trade, so let's move down.
Yeah, look at
So
that.
Dylan
Oh,
Thieneman ends up
Thieneman
going
went.
to Oregon.
Okay.
Falk is the guy that they were trading up for. Spencer Fano and Monroe Freeling are tackles that the Vikings are not going to necessarily be looking at. So that does leave us with Jordan Tyson and Denzel Boston as 2 top players on the board, but also Kenyon Sadiq is still here. Emmanuel McNeil Warren is still here. And Peter Woods was not working out. Is that correct? And
Mhm.
I'm conflicted on Peter Woods the same way I am on Caleb Banks. It's like he looks the part for
Yeah.
sure. Was that worth it to take him, even though the production wasn't great? It certainly wasn't terrible,
It
but it
was
was
just better
not.
against the run than
Yeah.
as a pass rusher. So to me, I think there's 2 ways to look at this, and then you can ultimately make the pick as the GM. You can look at it strictly from a positional value standpoint and say, you know what? Just pick one of the receivers, pick Jordan Tyson or Denzel Boston because receiver just is going to get you. I don't want to say it's always going to get you a bigger return on investment, but that's just a marquee position. We think it's the second most important position on the field. I would say if you don't go receiver, honestly, Kenny and Sadiq, and maybe I just talked myself into it with like the evolution of KOC's system and the long term potential like all pro tight end that you could have in an offense that has Justin Jefferson that they cannot zero in down the seam. Sadiq or McNeil Warren would be really interesting to me here. And I don't know if McNeil Warren, even at 22, is might be a little rich, but you did trade down and you already got that third rounder. So that's where I would lean. But if you want to just say, hey, pick a wide receiver because it's a wide receiver and the uncertainty of Jordan Addison, I think that makes sense too.
I think that, and I don't want to be the person that was totally talked into something by the combine, but Kenyon Sadiq is just such a unique prospect. Like he has pretty good numbers in terms of his grades, pretty good numbers in terms of his production, and even not that bad for run blocking. And is just an absolute freak monster when it comes to the high end potential for Kenyon Sadiq. It's just hard to talk me out of it, considering that TJ Hawkinson is probably here for one more season, and then you don't have that position, which is really important in this offense. I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna
Let's do it.
go for the freak because I'm always chasing high end. That's just
Yes.
always that's my theory on everything. Like, what's the guy that has the highest end potential that I won't be able to replace in free agency? It's a guy like Kenyon Sadiq. So we
Mhm.
go a little bit off the board there with the first pick. Now we're here at number 49. Top players, AJ Halsey, who we've talked about a lot. We already took a tight end, Keontae Scott, cornerback, Jake Gold. Is it Golday?
Gold Day, I think so. Yeah.
Golday, the linebacker. D'Angelo Pons had a great. We probably should have mentioned him. A great NFL combine.
He did.
I think, and Chris Johnson is here too. I think it's going to be really hard, Chris, for me to not take either D'Angelo Pons or Chris Johnson with this pick.
Agreed. And D'Angelo Pons, I think Daniel Jeremiah tweeted it. He did it a lot, like when he was tweeting out the measurements, almost identical measurements to Antoine Winfield Sr., who the Vikings and their fans certainly know very well. He plays like Antoine Winfield Jr. Like he thinks like he's 6'2" and 220, and he is little, but had over a 40-inch vertical, big time broad jump, good tackler, and was just impossible to throw against in Indiana's national title winning season. So Pons would be like, you'd be picking someone with size deficiencies and length deficiencies. So it's either him or, to me, Chris Johnson, that I said ticks all the boxes on film and then ran 4.4 flat, had the late first, mid second round talent. And to get him at pick, 49 this would be, I think that would actually make a lot of sense. So either one of those two.
I'm going to go football player number one. Although, you're saying Chris Johnson is really great on tape too, but Pons, to me, I can't avoid the Antoine Winfield comp, and I'm going for it. I'm going to take him in the second round. So the Vikings get a tight end and then a corner. This feels like they walked it right up to us with our first third round pick, which is number 62. And here's Connor Lew and Jake Slaughter, but also look at all these targets, Chris. Connor Lew, Jake Slaughter, Jonah Coleman, the running back from Washington, linebacker Jacob Rodriguez, running back Emmett Johnson. It's almost like they just asked us which players should be targets in the third round. Now, remember, we have two picks that are close together here. Should we just take Jake Slaughter and apologize to nobody? Okay.
I think so, especially because we went a little bit off the beaten path with those first two picks. Pick Slaughter, and then you have your starting center, and then see who falls to you at 66.
Okay, at 66, with our trade down, Jonah Coleman, Jacob Rodriguez, Emmett Johnson. You love Emmett Johnson. Jacob Rodriguez is, man, a 94.6 run defense. Great. Holy cow. A real baller. Linebacker, to me, is a position that's a little easier to replace in free agency. I mean, Eric Wilson was a breakout player for them last year. Ivan Pace had 2 good seasons with them. Running back, they need some jolt, but I also just think they need someone young. So like, just even by being what would Aaron Jones run in a 40 right now? I think that, I mean, tell me if you feel like we got a Chris Brazzell right here too, but
Chris Brazzell would be, and even Kyle Lewis. So it shows that like, we're going to stick with the cliche that there's some really fun talent in the second round and then day 2 of the draft, especially in this class. I would lean Chris Brazzell, honestly. That I agree with you on the linebackers. If you pick Jacob Rodriguez, I think that would make sense because I do think he has a reasonably high floor. He did play behind like David Bailey and Lee Hunter and Romello Height, Skylar Gill Howard, who are all going to be picked in like the top 4 selections. So I do think he was playing in front or behind what was a huge advantage defensive line. To me, Brazzell can be that downfield specialist right away early in his career and actually has decent route running chops. So I think in time, if you're planning ahead for Jordan Addison, maybe the departure or just the uncertainty, I would like that value at the second most important position with your second pick at selection number 66 here.
Yep. And we're going to do that because this is Kevin O'Connell's offense.
Yeah.
Until further notice. And they're going to stack. I mean, look at how much is invested into it right now. I mean, and it's yielded some pretty good results when the ball can actually find the wide receiver. So, all right, last pick is 97. Kyle Lewis, who we talked quite a bit about, is on the board at 97. That feels like good value. The safety position has not been addressed. Is it Zach Wheatley?
I thought it was Zakee Wheatley.
Oh, Zakee. Okay. I didn't hear his name pronounced.
He's really good. He is my high floor. He's an older prospect. He played like over 2,000 snaps at Penn State. He's a decent athlete. I don't believe he worked out in Indianapolis because I feel like we would have seen some big time numbers from him too, or at least comparable to like Emmanuel McNeil Warren in that middle range. Genesis Smith from Arizona tested outstandingly. I have not watched him yet, but I would say Zakee Wheatley, I could see Brian Flores being enamored with, all right, this guy's almost 24, 4 years of playing at Penn State. We don't need to like coach him up for a season. He can just be plug and play on our defense. And at pick 97, I think that would be really good value.
Bang, we're going to do it. Zakee Wheatley. And so now this is our entire draft. Let's see what they gave us here for a grade, a B. What in the world? They gave us a D+ for the Kenyon Sadiq. Oh, come on, PFF. Give me a break.
This would be
here.
really, this would be like an outlier draft, but I think it would be so fun and prioritizing needs eventually, but just going best player available, usually over the long run, the teams that just say, yeah, we're going to pick the best player, even though it's already a strength or we don't need it. In a year after a guy gets hurt or a guy leaves via free agency or whatever, they're usually in a better spot. That's the way that you maintain long-term stability, is going BPA, especially early in the draft.
Number one, I'm already really liking the idea of trading down.
For sure.
I think that there have been opportunities in recent years to trade down that they didn't do it and maybe had some regrets there. But Kenyon Sadiq, tight end, at number 22 after we trade down. Then D'Angelo Pons, the corner, number 49 overall. We get Jake Slaughter in the 3rd round at pick, I think I said 62, 82. For some reason on my computer, 8s looks like 6s sometimes.
Yeah, it was hard for me to see too.
Yeah, sorry about that. So pick 82. We get that actually makes more sense for the trade. Oh no, we got pick 86. That makes more sense for the trade because 66 would have been pretty high. So my apologies for that. So 86 ends up being Chris Brazzell and then Zakee Wheatley. So we address a guy who's a now and later for Kenyon Sadiq, who could take over for Hockenson after this year, or they could move on from Hockenson and save some cap space. Pons to me is exactly what they need in the secondary, even though he's undersized. That could allow them to play more nickel. Jake Slaughter, that's an immediate starting center if he works out. Brazzell is a development wide receiver who may, after a year, be something exceptional. And Zakee Wheatley could probably start quickly because we see that all the time for safeties. Safeties start often in the NFL pretty quickly. Yes. So there you go. There is
I love it.
Our combine draft sim, our combine breakdown, the players that stood out, the potential targets for the Vikings. So Chris Trapasso, we're going to be doing this every week until the draft. And then of course, your breakdown of the Vikings picks when we get there. What do you think?
I absolutely love that draft. I think it was, I thought we were going to go run of the mill at the beginning, but I think we were riding the wave of the momentum that we always get from the combine with some of those workouts, but I'm totally fine with it. And if we're going to do it at any point, do it right now, the post combine episode where we're going to just draft guys with 40+ inch verticals.
All right. Chris Trapasso draft show is back. Everybody cannot wait every week to build up to the NFL draft with you. So thank you all for following the combine coverage in Indianapolis with our podcast that we did there. And I mean, we're going to be doing a lot of draft simming, and there's going to be a lot of draft rumors and everything else. And then everything will change once free agency happens, which will make this even more interesting. So we will talk to you again very, very soon, Mr. Trapasso.
Football.